And it looks like the Democrats actually have decided, hey, this is a great business model. Let's make up fake newspapers online, have it laced with left-wing propaganda, and we'll do it under a newspaper masthead. Great. How is this not a violation? Why isn't this what we talk about around this place, how we're going to save these programs? Oh, you can't do that because you're going to have a president who's going to knife you by saying crazy things. Happy to share. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, we're going to try to do something a little tricky this evening. You're going to see the continuing theme of, hey, here's where we're borrowing, here's where the borrowing's coming from. And then I'm going to hit on some of the things that what's the nice way? Yeah, drive me almost insane on the questions I get here, the things I get on this stupid thing. And I've come to this conclusion. We live in a world where the propaganda, the fake information, the distortion fields around us actually do not want America to succeed. And that's a pretty dark thing to say, but let's actually walk through my theory. And look, I'm going to make the point. On some of these presentations, I've been blessed. You go on YouTube, and I had one a couple months ago. I think there's like 1.3 million views. Go look at the comments section. I'll argue about half those comments are bots. They're fake. When you see things like, well, if you just didn't give any money to Israel, we could balance the budget. You start to realize that there's a world out there that takes advantage of our open society, that comes at us with things that are lies, and the poor person out there who's just trying to take care of their family, on occasion grabs their phone, tries to read little bits of news, maybe reads a comment or two, and they don't realize the information coming at them is absolute crap. And then the other problem here, I'm going to show here, when I have my own president get behind a microphone, look at the American people, and say things that are absolutely not true. And then an idiot like myself tries to come up and say, I have a path. There's a path. If I can get my brothers and sisters on the left to work with us on the right, there's a path to save this country. But it's really hard when the State of the Union goes in that podium right there and says things that are absolutely not true. Does that mean they're also a deliverer of fake information? Because math is hard. Math is uncomfortable. Telling the truth is hard. Maybe this place has lied for so many decades that the public says, look, we're just going to believe whatever is comfortable. So let's actually walk through first a little bit of reality here. I like to start with this chart because it sort of lays out where we're at today. Do you see the red? 74% of the spending is in that red area. 74% of the spending in this place is on autopilot. We don't get to vote on it. Do you see the blue? That's what I get to vote on. That's defense and non-defense discretionary. I get to vote on that. Every dime of it is borrowed. Every dime a member of Congress votes on is borrowed money. And guess what? We're in so much trouble because interest now, if you actually do, I have net interest on this, which I think is unfair because there's this thing called net. That's the publicly borrowed. That's where the Treasury sells bonds. I think this week we're selling $111 billion. Maybe it's 112 or 13 billion dollars in 3 different auctions this week just to finance our insatiable spending. Because remember, and this is one of the things I find even at home is uncomfortable, 100% of the borrowing from today through the next 30 years, according to CBO, is interest, Medicare, and if a decade from now we backfill Social Security. It's demographics. And yet, how do you make policy? And there's ways to fix it with policy. When the leader of the free world looks into a camera and says things that are just insane when it comes to being on a calculator. So take a look one more time. Non-defense discretionary, defense, all that's borrowed, and a wedge. I should do a chart that shows you how much is borrowed money, because if we borrow 2.1, 2.3, I originally thought we might be at $2.5 trillion borrowing this year, and some of the tax receipts are a little bit better. Some of the spiking growth that we had in the first part of the fiscal year on healthcare costs have flattened ever so slightly. So we're probably going to end up around borrowing $2.3 trillion this year. What that means is even part of the mandatory spending, Medicare. Because remember, Medicare isn't all on the trust fund. The trust fund only covers 38, 40%. The rest comes out of the general fund. So once again, look at this chart and understand your government functionally is an insurance company with an army. And that's meant to be sarcastic, but it's meant to sink in. So let's actually walk through. I'm going to walk through a couple of these just to sort of lay out where we're actually at. CBO predicts by 2054, so 30 years from now, budget deficits are entirely driven by Social Security and Medicare shortfalls. But we're not allowed to say that, are we? Does anyone remember the State of the Union? You know, there was a handful of Democrats and Republicans who'd been quietly working for a year trying to put together a plan to save Social Security in the long run. And the president gets there and goes, well, promise me you won't talk about Social Security or Medicare. And people look terrified and go, okay, yes, good campaign issue, because they care more about winning the next election than protecting seniors. It's the great lie around here. You know, you talk about it saying, I want to find a way to modernize and save, and you'll get the crap kicked out of you. You also told the truth. But you got to look at the data, the charts. And remember, the SSA, the Social Security Administration's actuary numbers are actually substantially more optimistic than Social Security or than Congressional Budget Office. So we're going to use the more optimistic numbers. But when you start to realize when the outlays are in over the next 30 years, you're starting to hit 17% of the entire economy. And revenues don't come anywhere close to that. And there's your crisis. But we can just pretend because getting through the next election is more important. And look, you've all seen this chart over and over and over and over and over and over and over. That interest continues to grow, and we think actually the interest calculation, this is important, let's do this right now. The hierarchy right now today, Social Security will this year $1.48 trillion. Total gross interest, because you remember, we just like a couple days ago, I think we sent $36 billion to Social Security because we had borrowed the money, Treasury had borrowed the money from the trust fund. We pay it back interest. Total interest in the United States will approach $1.2 trillion this year. And then you have Medicare, and then you have defense. Defense is functionally sitting as number 4. How do you have a society that runs around thinking, well, we just cut some defense? Well, I showed you the chart before. You can get rid of every dime of defense, every dime of non-defense discretionary. That's the Park Service, that's the FBI, that's the Foreign Service, that's us. You get rid of everything. You still have to borrow money. And you look at the charts over and over, and when we've had high marginal tax rates, we get about 18% of GDP in taxes. When we've had low marginal tax rates, we get about 18% of GDP. You have a long history, and I've done floor presentation after floor presentation that, you know, in this, when you go to lower the rates, you grew the economy, you got about the same percentage GDP. When you raise the tax rates, the economy shrunk a bit or slowed down, and you got the same percentage GDP. The idea is grow the economy as much as possible and then cut spending everywhere you can. And I have some charts, and I don't know if I should do them again, where actually maybe I'll just jump to them in a moment, where you lay out almost every tax hike that are the dreams of the left. Let's tax rich people for over $400,000. Let's do this tax and that tax. And I've come here with the academic papers and showed you when you maximize all those tax rates and, you know, capital gains, income tax, estate tax, you just do it all. You get about 1.5% of GDP. Okay? For us on a cut side, it's brutal But I can come up with almost $300 billion in non-defense discretionary. But that's 1% of GDP. So, hey, together we came up with 2.5%. You know, we're borrowing 6, 7% of the entire economy, and we've used up everything. I mean, understand what's going on here. So just another chart that basically gives you a sense. Rising Social Security and Medicare shortfalls driven entirely or nearly the entire 2019 to 2034 deficit hikes. That means in the 10-year window, almost all the growth of the debt and deficit during that time period. Interest, Medicare, and then at the end of the decade, Social Security Trust Fund's gone. Because right now, you'll get a Democrat saying, well, Social Security doesn't add anything to the deficit. They're absolutely correct. Until the trust fund's gone. And there's the part that enraged me the other night. So if any of you were able to try to watch the presidential debate the other night, my phone lit up at one point by a bunch of reporters who wanted to double check a number. The president basically said this. He was asked about Social Security. I begin to make the wealthy, I begin, and this is his actual quote, so it's disjointed, but this is what he said. I begin to make the wealthy begin to pay their fair share by increasing from 1% beyond to be able to guarantee the program for life. He's talking about Social Security, so 1%. Then he went on to say, well, that 1% will be enough to keep it solvent. Okay, so the left's definition of wealthy is over $400,000 income, right? The president just told the American people 1%. I'll fix Social Security by taxing them 1%. Okay, we got a math problem. And the problem here is the blue you see here, that's not 1%. I had to make it 2% because the 1% was so small we figured you couldn't even see it. So I doubled what the president said. This is the shortfall. Half of this is what the president told you it would work. So I'm enraged by all the fake crap that comes into my phone, my office, our phones, our publications, all the things that you see on Twitter, or X, or whatever we're supposed to call it today, that are just made up by bots, particularly in foreigners. What happens now when my own president does it? How do I show up here? How do I get my brothers and sisters here to actually make policy? How do you make policy when the leader of the free world says things that are mathematically just insane? And the immorality here, functioning 9.5 years. We double senior poverty in America. If we don't fix this, we double senior poverty. But the Democrats will weaponize it because they care more about winning the next election. And we have a president who could have just looked in the camera and said, look, we haven't had the number of children, therefore the number of workers, started to rollovers in 1990. It's just math. It's not Republican, Democrat. Demographics are what we are. Last year, the United States had 1.62 children fertility rate, meaning functionally in now our math is about 15 years, the United States will have more deaths than births. And I say that over and over, trying to get people to think. If your brain is trapped somewhere in the 1990s policy sets, none of that math is real anymore. It hasn't been real in 30 years. But this place is absolutely immoral. So I brought charts here over and over and over. So the Democrat solution was saying, instead of the president's 1% proposal, if you do the, what is it, the 14 point whatever percent, 14.4 or 12.4 total Social Security tax, not the Medicare, not the unemployment, those things. And you put it on all income over $400,000. I've shown a number of charts. If you use the CBO math, it covers about 38% of the shortfall. That's using over 12 points, both the employer and the employee's portion. And I have a president who looks into the camera and says, 1%. Now to come together at a town hall or a meeting here and say, hey guys, let's have an honest conversation because every day we wait, the on-ramp is harder to save Social Security. Oh, David, the president already told us 1% on rich people. I can show you the 12.4. You're covering only about 38%. Why is this place so absolutely immoral? Do they really care that much more about winning the next election? And then when we started to dive in this, so after the president said that, I started to dig through the stories other people had sent me. So I had this woman text me, weeks ago, did you know that the money in Ukraine, that the First Lady of Ukraine bought almost $1 million Bugatti, or however the hell you pronounce it, car? Well, BBC did a very long article about how much is absolutely fake coming into the U.S. marketplace of ideas. And there's bot farms, there's troll farms. There was they created fake photos, which turns out that's what actually helped BBC identify, hey, this is all fake stuff. How do you make policy in a world where we're awash in things coming in from our enemies, from the countries that want us at our throats, at each other, make it impossible to do basic policy to save the republic, and then my own president is making crap up? Look, the disinformation, article after article of the stuff that's coming crashing in, the things I have that come into my office about Israel that are coming in from bot farms. We have article after article that Microsoft did an analysis of how much was coming in from Chinese bot farms, Chinese servers. We actually have how much the bots, apparently we just had a major disruption of stopping 968 Twitter accounts that were pumping in completely fake, and they were all coming from a bot farm in Russia. And this happened this week. State Department just identified that bot farm and got it shut down. Now even better, to my Democrat colleagues, we've actually now had a couple stories come out that even have some really fun stuff. It turns out a number of the Democrat activists are actually setting up fake newspapers. Now, it wasn't bad enough. One of these articles in there actually has a section talking about that in American sort of small-town newspapers, as many as half, process this, as many as half are actually fake. My wife pointed out to me that there was a newspaper from southern Kansas, where she grew up, that went out of business decades ago, that somehow popped up in her news feed, and it had this crazy stuff in it. Turns out that was on the list of the ones that have been sort of spoofed. A spoof URL looks like from Russia. So think about that. In America, about half the small-town online newspapers you see are actually fake. How many of our constituents know that? And it looks like the Democrats actually have decided, hey, this is a great business model. Let's make up fake newspapers online, have it laced with left-wing propaganda, and we'll do it under a newspaper masthead. Great. How is this not a violation? But once again, the left proves they're a hell of a lot smarter than we are when it comes to being mercenary on campaigns. They figured out a way to get around the campaign finance laws, spend money, but it's free speech. It's fake, but it's free speech. And then idiots like me get here and try to walk through the math. Look, this is the MedPAC report. It's not that hard to read. When you have quotes in here that in 2022, 13% of all personal and corporate income taxes collected by the federal government were transferred to Social Security, or excuse me, the Medicare Trust Fund. By 2030, so that's how many years? What, 5 budget years? 4 budget years? 22% of all tax receipts from corporate and individual income tax, 22% will just go to Medicare. Functioning in a decade, you've gone from 13 to 22 of all tax receipts. It's demographics. Why isn't this what we talk about around this place, how we're going to save these programs? Oh, you can't do that because you're going to have a president who's going to knife you by saying crazy things. The Joint Economic Report we published a couple weeks ago, we tried to provide brutally honest math, brutal detail, with actual solutions. Will anyone actually read it? So back to, you don't need to see it. This one my staff was particularly fond of. It turns out that one of the new spoofings out there that are coming into young people's phones is celebrities with quotes that the celebrities have never said. Are you all ready for this election cycle where you have AI memes looking like a member of Congress, looking like a president, looking like a senator, looking like someone's celebrity, saying things that are completely fake? Now come here and try to do difficult policy where you're going to have to take on some bureaucracies, take on certain business models, adopt technology to crash the price of healthcare. Are you going to get hit by an army of bots, an army of fake videos, an army of fake postings saying, they can't do that because some group has figured out that winning the election or stopping us from saving the country from its debt spiral? I'm trying to explain, it's bad enough having to take on the bureaucracy, it's bad enough having to take on the calcified intellect of particularly some of my friends here who say, we could just fix everything by taxing people more. What happens when our voters have to face millions of absolutely fake information coming crashing at them? I can't wait to see the bots and the comments they put in the video below this posting. So take a look here. Not touching Social Security means large benefit cuts. When you start to actually take a look, and I think we did this before, and remember the number goes up and down depending on employment, but we were working on one the other day from last year's CBO number that basically showed the average couple would take about a $17,400 cut in their Social Security a decade from now when the trust fund's gone. This is immoral. Shouldn't it be actually a place where we actually work on these things? And then you actually start to actually look at the lies, the misinformation that our brothers and sisters on the left keep saying. Oh, when we did tax reform, it was a gift to the rich. Okay, you got a math problem. The higher income, the top 20% today pay 69% of all income taxes. It is more progressive today than the tax code has ever been. The wealthy pay a higher percentage of federal income taxes today than ever before. And the lower quartiles today pay the lowest federal income tax rates in U.S. history. Well, since income taxes, 16th Amendment. How often do you hear this? But that doesn't fit the narrative. And then you have the jerks actually say things like this. Well, you guys had, $1.7 trillion spending. Yes, we got $900 billion more revenue than expected, but that was horrible. Hey, we're going to spend about $2 trillion in grants and gifts and those things to big business because if they do clean energy stuff. It's like they don't look themselves in the mirror. And once again, I've done entire presentations here going through every left-wing tax idea, trying to add it up, and even when you don't do economic effects, if you do economic effects, these numbers, and then try to say, hey, you guys are only getting about 1.5 points or so of GDP out of these numbers. You're not getting anywhere close. You've got to do it through policy. And then the fragility that no one was prepared, well, some of us were prepared for, is interest rates. How many of you think interest rates are going back down, particularly on the long end of the curve? Yeah, remember, what the Federal Reserve does is on the short end of the curve, meaning shorter term bonds. When you start to look at 10-year debt and up, some of the best bond traders and economists right now are saying it's not going down. You might get a little bit of tick. United States is now number 14 on the credit stack, meaning Greece today can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than we can. And you read the notes on the S&Ps and the Moody's, it's not only, and we have one of the healthiest economies in the industrialized world, but one of the things that's going on is they don't trust us. Will our governance be disciplined enough to actually take on the spending and the debt? And the fact of the matter is, we're paying a premium now. United States now pays a premium on our debt. Remember, this week I told you, I think we're borrowing there's 3 auctions this week, about $111 billion. And we're going to pay a premium on that debt because sometimes this place doesn't look like we're serious about taking the debt on and managing our fiscal affairs. And it's serious when you keep looking at the issuance. First off, we're having great difficulty selling long-term bonds. Do you remember a few months ago we had sort of a bond tantrum? Why do you think Treasury moved things down to sell short-term, short-term, short-term? Because a lot of investors out there don't even trust this government enough to say, I'm going to buy a 30-year U.S. savings bond and I'm going to be safe. And once again, even a 100% tax rate on small businesses and upper-income families could not come close to balancing the long-term budget in this country. Stop thinking you're going to do it with tax hikes, or even for those of us who want to cut the size of government. You need to have revolutionized the cost of this government. Stop being afraid of technology. Stop being afraid of the things where we could change the cost of this government because it might affect your business model. And look, I was going to try to put 1 or 2 last happy talk until I realized one of the slides I wanted to show you was once again another concept of why the Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act is the most Orwellian named piece of legislation in modern history. They're very proud that saying, we're subsidizing, electric cars. My wife has an electric car. She loves it. But the data basically said, when they passed that, I came here to the floor and showed, hey, here's the survey data. Almost everyone that's going to buy an electric car is buying them with the subsidy, without the subsidy. It's a lifestyle, it's a personal, it's almost a status symbol. But let's give away billions and billions of dollars. So now you actually have breakthroughs. Could you imagine if just a fraction of that resource had gone more into primary research? Looks like there's been a breakthrough on solar cells, an additional 25.7% efficiency. Yay! Except the problem is it was developed in China. So the very people who preach at us, let's subsidize all this stuff, but let's subsidize last generation's, or maybe even the generation before that's technology. You want me to put solar panels in my house? You want us to drive electric cars? You want this? Make it so economically sensible. Make it so affordable that it is the disruption. Why did you stop going to Blockbuster Video? Because you had this button you could hit at home and streaming videos right to your home. Was that subsidized by the government? The fact of the matter is there's technology disruptions. Why didn't we fixate on that? Well, it turns out maybe the disruptions don't write checks to your campaign. The Democrats' planned economy, the control of the marketplace, the arrogance of somehow they think what they know what the future looks like, instead of building a tax system or regulatory system that's competitive, it's disruptive, some are winning, some are losing. That's the way the American economy is supposed to work. And in many ways, we have now built a society of oligopolies. Thank you, Dodd-Frank. Thank you, Democrat policies. You've made the big bigger, you've made the big really powerful, and you've made the really big and powerful now your constituency. And it turns out now Republicans, if you actually look at who votes for us, it's entrepreneurs, it's working people, and it's those who are being crushed by those they have to compete with, who now get subsidies by their political allies. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announcement of policy, January 9, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.